welcome everybody. I'm Jeff Gedmin with American Purpose and a former president of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Michelle High is our managing editor. Susie Garman is with us, our senior editor, and Sid Lipset, who did so much to organize today's program, our arts and culture editor. Welcome to all of you. We're going to give this an hour this morning. We're going to have a hard stop at 11 a.m. Eastern. And I'm going to introduce our two guests of honor in just a moment. And we're going to have a conversation about Gaza, Ukraine, and the West's wider struggle, starting with Natan and with me. And then we're going to knit in Pavel Butorin, who is based in Prague, is a senior figure at RFERL, and is the director of Current Time, Russian language television and digital. And we're going to talk to you, Pavel and Natan, about today's dissidents in Russia, the current trends inside Putin's Russia, and Putin's prisoners, including Pavel, your wife, Alsu. More about all of that in just some minutes. But first, if I may say, Natan, you are, if I count correctly, you've served in 4 Israeli governments, maybe it's even more, as a minister by now. You're a book author and an essayist and commentator on democracy and human rights worldwide. And of course, relevant to part of this conversation in due course, you spent 9 years in Soviet prisons. And so it's a pleasure and honor to see you, Natan. I'm sorry we're not together in person, but thank you for your valuable time. And if I may ask a first question to you, Natan, you've written and talked about this. I think a number of people think Gaza and Ukraine, what do they possibly have in common? But you've looked through a lens that sees, I think I'm right, that there's a wider struggle on now across the West, in the United States domestically, but also in wars in Ukraine and Gaza. And there are links. Could we start there? And could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, of course, there are obvious links. And externally, the most obvious link is today that Putin, Iran, and Hamas are the closest allies. And it's sometimes it's very sad for me to see how Israel is fighting Iran and Hamas and is appeasing Russia, and how America is fighting Russia and appeasing Iran. So it's really a paradox. Now, in fact, both war in Ukraine and the war launched by Hamas, in fact, in Iran behind, is the war about the future of free world. Those who think that the war in Ukraine is about a piece of land, about Crimea or Donbass, makes a big mistake, because that's the effort of Putin to restore Russian Empire. And I can speak about history of the changes in Putin's mind. And in order to restore empire, he has to change the rules, how the world is run after the Second World War, to impose again the power of the strong, to be stronger than your neighbors, and then to force them to become partially or fully part of this empire. And if, God forbid, he will succeed on the second step, in fact, it's already the second step, then I think with the time all the Europe will be in danger. But what is more important, the rules by which the world is set after the Second World War, after with the Declaration of Human Rights in the United Nations, with Helsinki Act and so on, will be fully destroyed. And that's why it is very important for the free world to see it as the struggle against the free world. If you move to the Middle East, well, there is the rise of fundamentalism and terror, and unfortunately, some progressive neo-Marxist theories, which are becoming allies all over the world. And Israel is at the forefront, fighting against this awful terror. And of course, it's a very difficult struggle. It's always the struggle of the state against terrorist organization in the in the cities. It's always very difficult how to remain country which believes in human rights and at the same time to fight the terror. But again, to see it simply as a struggle of Israel for its own survival without taking into account bigger picture, that Iran is standing behind this, that Iran is preparing to change its place in the world through the nuclear weapons, but having these arms of Hezbollah and Hamas and fundamentalists, it's clear that it's danger and challenge to all the free world. And it's not accidental that in the last months, Russia and Iran became the closest, really the closest allies. And Putin is maybe the only leader who is openly embracing Hamas. And China is not far from this. So that is the real danger to the free world. And at this moment, there are two fronts. In Europe, Ukraine, in Middle East, Hamas against Israel. But we have to see it as much broader war against the rules of the free world.
Natan, thank you. Let me go back to the specific subject of Ukraine for a moment.
Yeah.
It's something you know about from different perspectives because you were born in what is today Eastern Ukraine. Do you still have family and friends there? Where you grew up, is that in the midst of where fierce fighting is? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I was born, and then it was called Stalino, then now it is called Donetsk. That is the center of the war between Russia and Ukraine, of Russian aggression against Ukraine, already for many years already. No, I don't have now family. I have some friends with whom I was together in school more than 50 years ago, and their grandchildren. But that's not the point. The point is that I know very well. And in my childhood, I faced a lot of anti-Semitism in Ukraine, in Russia, Soviet anti-Semitism. And when another side says, but aren't they anti-Semites? Say, no, at this moment, it's not anti-Semitism at this moment is not official policy of Ukrainian government or Russian government. But while Ukraine faces its past very frankly and openly, and as a result, builds very good relations between different peoples inside Ukraine, Russia is trying to bring back the imperial character of this country with all the dangers for everybody, for Jews and for non-Jews. Well, Ukraine is in a very difficult situation at this moment, and in fact, critically at this very moment, a lot depends on decisions of American Congress. Yeah.
So it seems to me from what you have said, Natan, and just as a general observation, that part of these debates turn on a battle of narratives. And so I overstate for effect, but in the case of Ukraine and Russia's war on Ukraine, is this a battle over local lands with maybe some regional consequence, or, as you said and argue, in my view, persuasively, no, larger stakes here, and the consequences could be grave indeed if Russia is to prevail. Somewhat similarly, when we consider the October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israel, and again, I do overstate, but a battle of narratives seems to take place in media and some political circles where there are some who see this through the lens of a democratic state Israel defending itself against a terrorist group sponsored by Iran, and others are more interested or place more emphasis on Palestinian plight and Israeli excess in response. Can you help us sort that a little bit in your view? I think we'll return to that in the discussion round, but could you start there?
Look, if we'll start, I can speak a lot about narratives, and as the one who the moment I came to Israel, I said that I want Palestinians to have all the rights that I have, but will not have an opportunity to destroy me. I believed in that we really must have independent existence, not threatening to one another. But what is so surprising, that what we had on the 7th of October is one of the most sadistical, most awful pogroms, not only after the Second World War, in the history of Jewish people. You'll have to go as far back as 400 years ago to Bogdan Khmelnytsky's pogrom to see description of something analogous, when people were burnt alive, when the gang rape with cutting of the parts of the bodies, when children are killed in front of the parents and then everybody is burnt. Awful scenes, 1,200 people killed in the most awful ways. And after this, to hear from American academia, from professors, that is the beginning of liberation, I don't know. Well, to me, it reminds only these statements in the communist, in the earlier years of communist regime, when they were saying that killing of all the bourgeois, of all the capitalists, and it was done in the awful ways, of course, that is the beginning of great liberation of all the world. So again, we can start discussing the narratives and where Israel could do better and where Arafat failed and so on. But at this moment, the Israel was mobilized in few hours. You know, in few hours, it was the quickest mobilization in the world in the history of Israel, when 20% came without mobilization, volunteered immediately, because all this country felt immediately that we can be all destroyed in the most awful ways, and we have to, if we will not destroy Hamas, we will not be existing as a state. So that is the essence of the war. Then you start asking about the ways, was it excessive or not, and I can give you statistics which doesn't interest anybody, but with all the very difficult situation, on every terrorist killed, there are two innocent citizens. When America was fighting Iraq, on every terrorist killed, there were 4 innocent citizens. When Europe was fighting in Yugoslavia, there were 5 innocent citizens. But statistics doesn't interest anybody, because this idea that finally people who went out of prison are liberating their land, and Israel is fighting with such excessive force, unfortunately, that is the narrative which at this moment conquers the American academy.
So then let me ask you one more question, Natan, and then we're coming to you, Pavel, to bring you into the conversation. Could you give us a quick word about what role and what effect U.S. influence and foreign policy has on any of these matters? Tomorrow's Super Tuesday. We have a very big election in the fall and November. And from your perspective, does the United States and the outcome of the election in the fall play a big role, a modest role, a minor role? Many of us think it's really quite large, but it would be good to get your view.
Look, first of all, we have enough problems with our elections. I don't want to interfere to your elections. But as the one who is really very concerned about freedom and democracy and human rights in the world, I am extremely concerned by the fact that America can lose its leadership, because after all, and I know it from our years of struggle, the world doesn't have another center of defending human rights and freedom but the United States of America. And the fact that the United States of America, on one hand, there are people on the right who believe in friendship, or at least partnership, with dictators. And realize they believe that they can make a deal, always two good businessmen can always make a deal with dictators. It's dangerous. No less dangerous for me is that on the left, so-called liberals, and I say the biggest problem is how to differentiate between liberals and progressives, because there are suddenly these neo-Marxist theories about oppressed and oppressor, and that oppressed is always right, and oppressor is always wrong, and that's why there must be dictatorship of oppressors, oppressed in order to make the world more free. That's very dangerous. But I think Biden was an excellent, is an excellent president for us, for Israel. But after elections, what kind of influence the traditional liberals will have against progressives, I don't know. So I have concerns from both sides. I hope that during elections, American people will make sure that their leaders will be those who really believe in liberalism, in human rights, and in democracy.
Natan, thank you. I'm going to shift just a little bit, and Pavel, we're going to bring you in. As I said at the top, Pavel lives in Prague, is based there. He leads Current Time, RFRL's Russian language, television, and digital. And Pavel, it seems to me that Vladimir Putin has been, for the last couple of years or so, actually, on a bit of a hostage-taking spree and in the business of prisoner swaps. We had Brittany Griner for the arms dealer Victor Bout. He has now a number of people, including Evan Gershkovich of the Wall Street Journal, a history teacher named Mark Fogel. As of January, a 33-year-old manager of a spa in California who went home to visit her grandparents over the holiday season. And he has your wife, Alsu, who also is a journalist, a culture reporter for RFERL. Alsu has been, if not in proper detention, under de facto house arrest since last summer. Let's start with Alsu, Pavel, and could you tell us how she is doing and what we know about her conditions at this stage?
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, tomorrow will actually mark 140 days since Alsu was detained by masked men at her mother's apartment in Kazan for more than 4 months now. She has been held in a cold Russian prison cell. She is imprisoned not because she was caught dealing drugs or shoplifting. She is not an activist, not a politician. As you mentioned, she is a journalist who traveled to Russia in her free time for a humanitarian reason to help out her elderly mother. She is charged with a non-violent offense of not reporting herself as a so-called foreign agent. Now there is this new case against her for what Russia refers to as dissemination of false information about its army in Ukraine. Yet she is kept in detention solely because she is an American national and an American journalist. This detention is completely unfair, and there's nothing we want more than to get her back home so she can reunite with her family, with the children. Again, she was captured by Russian authorities in the middle of an act of kindness, which goes against this whole, idea of traditional values and something that the Kremlin seems to profess, yet doesn't quite stick to. We all of the communication that we receive through official channels from Alsu is censored. What we do know is that she now is in a very small prison cell. She sleeps about 3 feet from a hole in the ground for a toilet. Again, not a convicted criminal, just a suspect in a nonviolent case. She, as far as we know, she's not provided the necessary medical treatment that she needs. She has been denied consular access. As an American citizen, she is entitled to see the representatives of the U.S. Embassy. That consular access has not been granted. For more than 4 months now, she has been denied phone calls with the family. Her children have not heard her voice. And, our family, the children, we have 2 daughters, 12 and 15 years old. They have been without their mother for more than 9 months now. The situation is completely unacceptable. We want her back. Again, this is all happening on the backdrop of a continued assault by the Kremlin on civil society and journalism in general. So many independent journalists have to have had to flee Russia after the start of the full-scale invasion back in February 2022. There's literally no free press remaining in Russia. We here at RFE/RL at current time, we do our best to continue reporting for the Russians about Russia, using the very few remaining resources inside Russia, but also using a large network of reporters outside of Russia as well. So we do remain optimistic. I think our mission is strong. And as you know, RFE/RL has recently been designated as a so-called undesirable organization in Russia. You know, we may be deemed by the Russian government as undesirable, but we're, you know, if our audience numbers are any indication, our content is very much desirable by Russians inside Russia and outside of Russia, particularly our continued coverage of Russia's war in Ukraine. Back to the question of these arbitrary detentions. It's true. If you're an American, who also has a Russian passport, and if you are in Russia, you do have a big target on your back. You have to get out. You know, Alsu understood the risks when she traveled to Russia in May. We never really expected this to happen this way, but she prioritized being a devoted daughter to her mother. But it's true. You know, I'm not revealing any secrets here when I say that Russia has been purposefully collecting American hostages. We mentioned Alsu, Evan, Paul Whelan, Mark Vogel, and now Ksenia. And Ksenia Karelina is now arrested for exercising her First Amendment rights in the United States. Her First Amendment rights to free speech and association. And so is Alsu, who is also now investigated for a book that she merely edited. She didn't even write the book. It's a collection of other people's opinions. And again,
in the case, Pavel, sorry to interrupt you, but
Sure,
in the case
go
of
ahead.
Ksenia from LA, dual national, U.S. Russian, am I right? She attended a pro-Ukraine rally and made a small donation, I think $50 to a U.S. NGO supporting
exactly right.
victims of war. Is that right?
That's exactly right. She participated in a rally, you know, again, exercised her First Amendment rights of free speech and association, and again, donated a very small amount of money. It actually shouldn't matter at all, but she donated a very small amount of money to a pro-Ukrainian group. So this is, again, the Kremlin signaling to all Russians outside of Russia too, that their reach is so that their reach is just so far and long that they can just catch anyone and everyone.
Pavel, let me interrupt you again to ask. I'm going back a bit. If she is convicted, also, of spreading false information about Russian armed forces, that sentence could be roughly what?
Jeff, I don't like this question. I don't want to even consider worst case scenarios, but it's, you know, all right, I'll say it, up to 15 years, I suppose. But this is
from 10 to 25 years.
Well,
25 years came back to Soviet
Yeah,
Union.
well, this is why I don't like this question. You know, we hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We understand the kind of regime we're dealing with here. But unfortunately, Jeff, our reality now is such that we cannot hope for a resolution of this situation relying on the Russian court system. It is hardly independent. There's literally just one branch of government in Russia, and that's the executive branch. Really, you know, you know, Putin and his entourage. So we're dealing with a court system, with prosecutors, with judges, with investigators that appear to be subservient to the needs and the wishes of the Kremlin. But again, if you don't mind me saying, this again is happening on the backdrop of an intensifying assault on free speech and civil society. According to various estimates, we have in Russia, they have from 600 to 1,000 political prisoners now, according to Memorial. And some of the most outrageous cases include those of Vladimir Karamurza Jr., Then we have this artist, Sasha Skolichenko, who's serving a 7-year prison term for, for just a simple, for really was just a joke at a grocery store.
So let me, Pavel, I'm going to jump in and bring Natan back in. One question that we're going to open it up to a distinguished group in the gallery. Natan, the case that I make is that Alsu and her story and her detention is humanitarian, and we have to get her free, and we have to get her back to her family. And that's what we tell the State Department and White House and Capitol Hill every day, every day, every day. And we advance that argument in the NGO sector and with European partners too. But in addition, the argument that I advance is this is not just about Alsu, that this is a case that is both strategic and moral, integrated and aligned. And when we fight for her, we fight for everybody there in detention. And we're back to this larger struggle that takes energy, investment, and a multifaceted long-term strategy. Could you offer your views on that? And how important is it to someone who sits in such a prison to hear from voices across the West? We hear at times sing loudly from the top of the mountains, and we hear others say, but be careful, because if you're too loud, you annoy Vladimir Putin. Could you weigh in on that as well, please?
Well, it's all very big questions. I just published an article in The Economist exactly on the question why democratic dissidents are the real main allies of the free world. And I have to say that it took time to the free world to realize how intimately the question of human rights is connected with the questions of security, economical cooperation, and so on. Finally, it was understood, and in 1975, it was adopted Helsinki Agreement, which in fact connects these three baskets. Nevertheless, the Soviet Union always tried to avoid discussing it, and you can read in the memoirs, not in the archives of the White House, how Reagan administration was really imposing on every discussion, every dialogue with the Soviet Union, the question of the fate of democratic dissidents. And when it was said, but it's our internal affair, they were saying, first of all, because of Helsinki Agreement, it's not exactly your internal affair. And second, whether you want or not, but our public opinion, these are very important questions, and we cannot advance other issues without doing it. Yes, well, without going into too much into theory, because it will take a lot of time, I do believe that the main allies in the totalitarian society for the free world, those who are, first of all, they do understand who is double thinker in the country and who is true believer. That's very important characteristics. The totalitarian regime is, with the time, the number of double thinkers is growing and the number of true believers is shrinking. And when double thinkers are becoming dissidents, that's when revolution is happening. Dissidents are those who are giving hope and strength to all the potential dissidents who are double thinkers at this moment. And for the West, there is no other catalyzer, no other lakmus test, except from what is happening with democratic dissidents. And that's why, yes, it is very important that free world will make the fate of democratic dissidents part of its relations with the country. Now, as to what is important to dissidents, whether it is dangerous or not, this old debate, which was in the West in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, I always was saying that my motto in Soviet Union was, when you ride on the tiger, the most dangerous is to stop. For dissidents, there is nothing to lose. The fact that from time to time, American administration was saying that they didn't want to interfere and to support dissidents in Iran because it could endanger them And now in Russia, it's all nonsense. For it cannot be worse for distance. To the contrary, if the West connect put this question high enough, there is some hope. There is opportunity that their fate will not be so tragic. If there is silence, the best hope of KGB was, they were telling me, how long you think the West can talk about you? Another month, another 2 months, they have a lot of things of their own. They did hope that the world will forget about us. So not forget, will simply underplay it. It is very important to keep this question at the top of relations with Russia.
Natan, thank you. So you all, with 28 minutes to go, I'm going to open the floor. If you could push that button that is the raised hand function, I'll recognize you. If you'd introduce yourself briefly, and when I don't see you or that button pressed, Michelle is good at notifying me. Peter Scary, you have your hand up first. You have the floor, Peter, and say who you are.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. And Mr. Sharansky, I'm one of those, I'm an American professor, but not one of those that you pointed to. And I want you to know that I consider it an honor and a privilege to listen to you and to engage with you like this. Aside from the fact that I don't think those American professors that you did talk about have as much influence as you may think, but they certainly have enough, and I'm concerned about them as you are. I guess I would ask you, as you talked about the importance of liberalism and liberal values and human rights and democracy, which I obviously share with you those values and their promotion. What would you say, however, to the what I think is the large and probably increasing number of Americans who don't necessarily or probably do not at all agree with those American professors that you alluded to, but who do fear that Israel's prosecution of the war in Gaza now is undermining those values, or at least creating creating the possibility or fostering the reality that it's going to be very, very, very difficult to see a future where those values can obtain between Israel and the Palestinians. Could you address that, please?
Yeah. Well, first of all, about professors, I have to say that I was in many campuses in America in the last months, and the slogan "from the river to the sea," it's not some exceptional professors. This slogan covers all the campuses of the United States of America, and they don't know what river, what sea, but what it really means that Israel should not exist.
Well,
And
maybe all the campuses, but not all the professors. Okay.
No, not all the professors, of course, not all the, but if the power of campus life on the hundreds of thousands of American young citizens is unbelievably big. And that's why you can see today almost majority of students say that between Israel and Hamas, they're on the side of Hamas. Of course, they don't know that Hamas is a terrorist organization. They don't know about this crime. They say, well, we don't know. We don't go into details, but definitely we're on the side of Hamas. What's unbelievable even to think about it. Okay, now, look, I think I am fully for freedom of Palestine, and democracy in Palestine. So, but who stopped it? Who made it impossible? I'm saying free world, including Israel, Clinton, Peres, whoever was then. Well, they decided that the one who will be running Palestinian people, the Yasser Arafat. And they decided that now it will be our dictator. We'll give him enough money, $30 million every month in the private pocket of Yasser Arafat from public money, because we need him as our dictator in order he will destroy Hamas. That was official line of Oslo. That's why from the first week of Oslo, I was against it. I was warning, and some people were warning, that Arafat will need that his people will hate Israel, and he'll make sure that they'll hate us more and more. And so then at that moment, 30 years ago, I was told by some of our leaders that it's good that you're speaking about encouraging liberal society, but it will take 30 years. And we are doing peace in 2 years. So 30 years passed. Today, you'll need much more time than 5-10 years in order the new generation of Palestinians will be open enough, liberal enough that it will want not to destroy us. So Israel has a very difficult situation. How to remain democratic society and not to let terrorists to destroy us. You're saying that Israel's attitude is problematic. Maybe, but I want you to show me historic examples when the country was fighting against terror inside the cities, when terrorists, in this case, terrorists are using 2 million people as their living shield, and they have this type of proportions between the number of terrorists killed and the number of Palestinians by official data. I'd like Israel to have much better operations with much less innocent people killed, but the history doesn't have these examples yet. And in the meantime, Hamas is explaining very clearly that we will repeat what happened on the 7th of October again and again and again until there'll be no Jews in Palestine from the river to the sea. So do I want that there'll be less children killed? Yes, I want very much. Is there a practical example when it can be done better? I'd like to learn from the example. I didn't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I obviously
Peter,
don't have those examples, but thank you. Okay.
Peter, thank you, and Natan, thank you for that. So then I'm looking for the next colleague. I don't see a hand. Michelle, can you help me? Is there a hand I'm not seeing?
Actually, just at this very moment, Paul Gross just put his hand up.
Paul, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you this presentation. Thank you, Natan, as always. At the risk of oversimplifying, I think many of us see Putin's Russia and the enemies that Israel faces, led by Iran, as being part of a loose, if not alliance, then a sort of loose axis that is threatening the West and the free world more broadly. And, you know, essentially that Israel and Ukraine are sort of, whilst fighting different wars and different circumstances, are on the same side of this current geopolitical divide. And with that in mind, I recall relatively early on in the Russia-Ukraine war, President Zelensky made a remark that he saw Ukraine as being, I think he was talking about a post-war scenario when Ukraine is free of the Russian invasion, that Ukraine would be what he called a big Israel, right? Obviously much larger than Israel, but a big Israel. And what I took that to mean was that that Ukraine would be a democratic country, part of the free and democratic world, but that, like Israel, it would have to take security extremely seriously. And like Israel, and unlike, say, France and the UK and the United States, it would have to be constantly looking over its shoulder at the neighbors, or certainly in Ukraine's case, one particular neighbor. I wondered, Natan, if you first of you recall that comment. I know you've met Zelensky more than once. Can you comment on what you think he meant by that phrase?
Yeah, well, I met Zelensky and had an interesting conversation during the war twice, and I met him a number of times before the war. First of all, not only he, there are many people who are in Ukraine who are full of admiration of Israel, of the fact that how Israel was built, how it succeeded to become a startup nation, being surrounded by the enemies, and most important, they want to learn from Israel how you can be permanently, not simply to win the war or to have a difficult 15 years war, but how permanently you have to live with those who want to kill you on your borders, and at the same time to have a normal democratic life and so on. And by the way, Ukraine has a big potential to become a big democracy. Well, at this moment, it's also a very corrupt society, but they realize it. And in terms of democracy, human rights, desire to keep the system of free elections, it's very powerful. They still have to learn how to make business absolutely independent, isolated from the politics, but many countries don't know how to do it. So yes, Zelensky as a Ukrainian leader and as a Jew sees Israel as a great example. At the same time, he's very sorry, I would say, and it's very almost feels so uncomfortable that Israel is not ready to give all that type of support which Ukraine hopes and Israel could, because Israel has its own fears of Putin. From my point, here I disagree with my own government, but that's the fact, yeah.
Very good, Paul, Natan, thank you very much. Who is next in line? Michelle, if we don't.
So Eric, Tim, would you like to ask your question directly? You mentioned that you sent an email to our events email address, but I did not see that come through. So would you like to just ask your question? Or
While
Eric-
he gathers his thought, I'm going to ask Pavel, from your chair there, are you and colleagues in current time, colleagues in the Russian service, colleagues in the Ukrainian service, to what extent are you following and reporting on this, what Paul described as a loose access between Russia and Iran? It does seem to be real. It does seem to develop beyond the initial provision of drones. Are you following that? What kind of reporting are you all doing?
Yeah, well, most certainly we're following those events. We, I'm going to try and refrain from passing judgment. That's not something that we practice here. We don't really practice opinion journalism. But yes, we have a lot. We've had guests in the air that have drawn these parallels that Paul has spoken about. Especially after Russia opened its doors essentially to a Hamas delegation, and visibly aligned with Hamas, we also have a very strong anti-disinformation unit here at current time, and those folks have also been following the way Russian state television has been covering the Israel-Hamas war. And the misinformation and disinformation that the Russian audience is exposed to. But yeah, no, this is a valid debate. That's something that we're certainly keeping our eyes on. Yeah, and this, by the way, and this is again one example of how we stand out in our reporting. That and by the way, when in the aftermath and during the military operation, the Israeli military operation against the extremists in Gaza, we had record audience numbers too. Again, another testament of our audience interest in these stories, and they come to us for a more balanced and fact-based reporting on this.
Pavel, thank you very much. Now we'll go back to Eric, who is unmuted. Eric, if you'd like to ask, you have the floor.
Okay. I think that first of all, glad to be here, and respect. I think that Mr. Sharansky's comments on the boilerplate, kind of neo-Marxist oppressed versus oppressor discourse and so forth, coming particularly from the American, university left, I think those comments are very, very appropriate. There's some real problems there. Having said that, I was reading an article in Haaretz, an interview with political scientist Gahil Tashir. The interview is March 2nd, talking about the Conference for the Victory of Israel. Settlement brings security, returning to the Gaza Strip, northern Samaria. That was in Jerusalem on January 28 of this year. She was paying close attention to the speeches. We're talking population transfer will bring peace. I'm just kind of cherry picking some stuff here. We're talking very far right people who used to be fringe. Now they're part of Likud, as I understand it. 10 cabinet ministers from 4 parties, 27% of the Knesset were at this thing. Netanyahu took a right-wing national-oriented liberal party, pulled it hard to the edge. Some of these people were, I'm quoting the interview. Some of these people were really out there. Now they're mainstream. And then the main point I want to make here is the thought is that Netanyahu thinks he can control the extremists. And in the end, do they control him? She says, yes, they do. She goes on to quote an interview where it was made clear by a guy called Yanon Magal, we are the ones who are making Netanyahu conform to our agenda. Notice that the critical junctions, the Messianic right works to make Netanyahu conform. Demonstrations in favor of the judicial reform weren't aimed against the left and the protest movement. They were intended for Netanyahu's ears, etc. So the right is pulling the same. I have real trouble looking at this as the war on Gaza as somehow standing up for the war for democracy that's now being waged by Ukraine and around the world, of which I'm a tremendous supporter. I'm looking at, for me, frankly, between Messianic settlers and ultra-Orthodox community that is really out there, that there is a lot of writing coming out of Israel saying these people are leading our country profoundly down the wrong path. They are religious fanatics, and they should not be confused with anything that resembles any Israel that we really recognize. So I have to say, I have a problem with respect with Mr. Sharansky's comments, lining this up as if these folks are fighting for the same thing that Ukraine is fighting for, that Joe Biden is fighting for, that the left here in my country, Canada, is fighting for. Netanyahu is looking weak. I take it you're getting my point. I'm sorry for the long presentation. Thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you, thank you. I would say that coming from American who lives in the country where at this moment almost 50% are voting for President Trump, or not president, candidate for President Trump, 70 million or something like this, and criticizing Israel, where maybe 5%, maybe less, will vote for that conference. And you are reading this article of somebody in Haaretz against this conference. You're going to read many interviews in Israel Hayom, in Jerusalem Post, and others, of those on the right who were absolutely against this conference. You know, some leading politicians of the right who were fully against this engagement, but they are absolutely against this conference. And when you are saying ultra-Orthodox, it's such a big term. There are many ultra-Orthodox who were supporting Oslo, which I was against, who were supporting many other steps. And today they will support almost every step which gives some hope for peace. So whatever to say, we are a free country. No doubt that the base of Netanyahu's government today is very narrow. And one of the reasons is that some other parties didn't want to join it. Well, I am not now speaking. I think that when somebody is prime minister for so many terms, it's not good. But on the other hand, as long as people are electing you, majority of people are electing you, you want to stay at power. I think you don't have to stay so long. But I'd like to see a government with broader base. And by the way, there are some chances for broader base. But even having such a problematic government because of its narrow base, nevertheless, Bibi Netanyahu himself and overwhelming majority are denying these positions with conference. But yes, everybody who has even 1% of supporters can hire the biggest hall in Jerusalem and then to make a press conference about it. I'll tell you frankly, that's a challenge for us. That's much less challenge that you Americans have in your own elections.
I'm a Canadian, by the way. We're talking almost 25% of the Knesset was at
No,
this.
that's wrong. No, I have to tell you, that's simply wrong. You read the other interviews. The leading Likud members, whether it is the leading ministers, whether it is the Yuli Edelstein, whether they condemned it. They're telling you the people who are very much against disengagement. This moment they maybe provisional for sometimes they are absolutely against coming back there. So overwhelming majority of people on all the polls which are against Israel staying permanent or even for a period of time in Gaza. Everybody, not everybody, overwhelming majority is for keeping security in our hands for the time being, because there is no other, as long as we didn't finish with the terror there is nobody to give our security. But to give control over the civilians' life, overwhelming majority of Israelis are absolutely against it.
But sir, with respect, no one's saying that it's a majority of people who are on board for this. The point of the article is that it's a minority that's hijacking power through backroom manipulation.
Well, what means hijacking power? That they have a voice. Of course, the press always goes for the extremes, but that the government and prime minister and minister of defense are not going there. It's clear from the way how we are having this battle, from the way what we are doing or not doing. There is no encouragement at this moment in Israeli society to go and to conquer as a civil power, not only to conquer Gaza, but to go and to create some island over which is run by Israelis in Gaza. Only security. And the fact that the narrow government depends always on some extremists, unfortunately that's true. And yes, that is of concern, but then you expect from leaders to deal with this. By the way, if elections are today, the result will be very clear. It's exactly unhappiness with the extreme voices that as a result, Likud as a central party is losing its place.
So, Eric, thank you. Natan, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
want to, if we can, squeeze in, time is racing, one more. Ann Pierce, may I offer the microphone to you, but for 60 seconds, if you don't mind?
Oh, sure. Well, thank you. It's an honor. I'm a big fan of the case for democracy, so it's nice to be here. There's a lot of talk about China's transnational repression, the foreign police stations, surveillance, harassment of Chinese Americans and Chinese minorities living abroad. And I wonder with this recent event where Putin arrested the dual citizen for donating $50 to a pro-Ukraine organization, if that is part of other signs that Russia is stepping up transnational repression, and whether there are similarities between Russia's and China's. There are definitely a lot of differences I see, but is there perhaps a trend toward more transnational repression on the part of Russia, and might there be a modeling after China's?
Well, I told you frankly, I know in general, I don't know the specifics of China's leaders persecuting Chinese scholars living abroad, but two things. First of all, about Putin, no doubt that in the last years, and especially in the last months, Putin is increasing his pressure on, I don't know how to call it, Russian diaspora or immigrants. And the fact that in the last weeks, as foreign agents was mainly used for those who are dissident voices inside Russia. Suddenly, many people who are living abroad, also Russian intellectuals, are declared to be foreign agents, and all types of messages are brought to them that they will have big problems, or their families will have problems if they'll continue criticizing Putin. So no doubt that they're increasing this pressure. Now, as to China and Russia, I have to say that you're right saying about awful policy of Chinese against minorities. Uyghur minority, maybe that's the biggest concentration camp which exists today in the world. And so, and the fact that for the West, not that it didn't matter, but it wasn't part of the relations with China at all. These questions like what's happening with Uyghur minority and many others. And the same, unfortunately, until recently was happening vis-a-vis Putin. Actually, now the war with Ukraine changed a little bit the situation, but it's very important now that the free world will have to face, I'm afraid, the axis of Russia, China, and Iran. It's very important to remember that desire of people to be free is the main weapon which you have inside those countries.
Jeff,
Thank
I have
you.
20 seconds.
Yeah.
Pavel, go.
Very quickly, and this is a very important question. Thank you for that question. I think the Putin's concept of the so-called Russian world precisely matches the Chinese model of how China considers all Chinese people to be of its own, regardless of where they are, in the United States, in California, in Virginia, Texas. So I think Putin and his government really like that concept. This is why for more than a decade now they've been expanding the network of so-called organizations to support so-called compatriots, and these recent detentions they prove that. So I think this is a very important question to ask ourselves. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Pavel. Thank you,
Thank
Anne.
you.
So we are wrapping up. I have a final quick question to Pavel, and then equally short to you, Natan. Pavel, for those on the line who want to offer their support to Alsu in pretrial detention in Kazan, where do we read? Where do we sign? Where do we send?
So the best place to go is our press room website at RFERL. You can go to pressroom.rferl.org, and I can drop the actual URL for that microsite to support also. I will do that momentarily.
Thank you so much. And for those interested and available, this Thursday, March 7th, we'll do a program on Putin's hostages with the Washington, D.C. Public Library in person, 12:30 local time, or virtually. And Michelle, if you would be kind enough to put a link to that event in chat. And then, before I thank everybody for coming, my final question to you, Natan, you know this and have lived this prison inside Russia. If you're giving a message to Pavel and the two girls, Bibi and Miriam, to keep hope, what would you like to say to them today?
Well, first of all, it's very tough reasons, very tough. And the way how Navalny was treated, it's awful, it's real torture. But at the same time, that's the place where people are, the most free people in Russia live there. And I hope they feel it. And their main hope is that the people of the free world have this deep connection to the free people in Russia. And I repeat that the most free people are those in prison, and that this union of free people in the world will defeat the tyranny. It's very important to remember that they know it, they feel it very strongly, how we are connected to their struggle and how we are supportive of the struggle.
So we're 11 o'clock Eastern on the dot. Natan, Pavel, thank you so much. It has been an honor. And to everybody who joined and was able to join into the conversation directly, you're important and it's your valuable time. So thank you very much. And to everybody, thanks. Good afternoon, good day, and good week to you.